So in this section, we will be covering things like little bit of introduction about this particular area, and the role of awareness and education, role of risk assessment, classification and licensing, due diligence, documentation and record keeping, internal controls and procedures, monitoring and auditing, and continuous improvement. These form the basic principles of compliance. So, the basic principles of export control compliance are essential guidelines and practices, so-called best practices, that organizations need to adhere to in order to ensure that their export activities comply with relevant export control regulations. Talking of the typical export control regulations compliance framework from the exporter's perspective, exporter from any country, anywhere in the world, what are their perspective when they talk about the compliance framework? How do they comply with these export control regulations, different laws and regimes? So typical framework of this compliance starts with policies and procedures. We'll be talking in more detail about it. Then the risk assessment, then the classification and licensing. So how do you classify your product depending on the country of origin and the country of destination? Then carrying out the due diligence of the end use and the end user, whether the goods that are being exported, the orders which are being received are bona fide orders. So those things becomes the next step from the point of view of the exporter. Then internal controls and monitoring, very important. Depending on the size of the company, if the size of the company is reasonably good size, large size, they need internal controls and monitoring mechanism. So internal policies, training of the employees, so many things are there in this internal control and monitoring. We will be talking in much more details in this course about it. Then the next step is documentation and record keeping from the exporter's point of view. Very important, because many things are sold by accurate and timely documentation and record keeping of all the shipments that are being sent, whom they are being sent, and what efforts have been made, whether those efforts have been documented, those initiatives have been documented very well for each transaction, complying with international export control regulations. Then continued training and awareness. So training and awareness was already at the internal control and monitoring is very much important, but training and awareness from the point of view of the continued improvements in the processes, the internal systems. So learning from the failures or learning from the incidents. So what happens? The natural next step is incident response and remediation. This is the result of the training and awareness. This is the result of the best knowledge of the employees. If they have the knowledge, if they understand the broader picture, they will be able to respond correctly with the incidents, and they will be correcting their course of actions if required, remediations. And so obviously the last step becomes your continuous improvement based on these continuous training, awareness, as well as the incident response and the remediations. So in general, this is a very typical export control regulation compliance framework from the exporter's point of view. Some of these very important areas will be going much more in detail in this course, and that will form the bulk part of this course.